Model Making Guru is sponsored by emodels.co.uk, your one-stop shop for all your model making needs. emodels.co.uk. Make something awesome. We're going to use these. Arse. We're going to use these. Oh, we're going to use these. Rattle. Arse. We're going to use these. Oh! Hey everyone, it's Fox from Model Making Guru here. Hello and welcome to part 4 of the Warhammer Conquest build series. Now, if you've not watched the previous videos, Warhammer Conquest is a monthly magazine Partwork by Hachette that allows you to build up great big Space Marine and Death Guard Warhammer armies. Yes, each month I receive 4 issues and I go through the models, tools and paints that come with them and I get them built and painted. Although I'll be filming these for absolute beginners and following the painting instructions in the magazines, where I can, I'll do things a little differently where it makes sense and introduce some better or more advanced techniques for you. And I will keep some of the models to one side to receive a proper, much more advanced, complex paint job. More like what I would normally do for myself, so you can test your skills. So, let's see what we have this month. And this month we have issues 7 to 10. So let's have a look at each one and see what we get. Okay, so we'll quickly go through the magazines. Now, just in case you're not aware, if you haven't watched previous videos, I'm not focusing on the gameplay side of it at all. This is a model making channel, so I'm focusing on the model making, the building, the painting and the weathering of all the figures and bits that come with it. Not really looking at the gameplay side. Anyway, we have 4 magazines again this month. First of all, we have issue 7, which you might think comes with nothing much, but it comes with 2 shades, Null Oil and Agrax Earthshade, and they are fantastic. What we get in the magazine, we have a bit more information on the backstory and how Space Marines are made and how they're selected. We have some information on more chapters of the Space Marines. Then the painting section in this week's or this particular issue is about using shades on the models you've already built so far. So your Space Marines and the Plague Marines and the Poxwalkers that you've already built, you're going to be applying shades to those, to the golds and the silvers. Then there's a load of gameplay stuff at the back. We don't really bother about this, isn't the important bit. And some more bits and bobs and rules, and then the usual adverts on the back. So that's issue number 7. Issue number 8, we have off Issue number 8, we have plastic that comes with this, and again we'll have a look at that in a moment. Issue number 8, we get a Librarians, and in this issue we learn about Librarians and what they do. And I think we're introducing some psycho powers if you're playing the game side of this. So a lot more background story, some history of the sort of fluff of the Warhammer stories, and then we go through the building and the making of the Librarian. And then the painting. Now the painting, obviously, the only 2 new colours we've got so far are the shades, Null Oil and Agrax Earthshade. So the painting for this guy is going to be exactly the same as we've done before on the other Space Marines, but the inclusion of the Agrax Earthshade and Null Oil. So we should know what we're doing. There should be hopefully as well a chance, depending on how this cloak goes together, there should be a chance to show you how to fill gaps, but we'll come to that if it happens. We'll come to that when we get there. It's actually been an interesting build for this one. Then again, we have some gameplay shenanigans in the back, but we don't really care about those. We're not playing the game right now. Next up, okay, this is another repeat episode, just like one of the previous issues where we got, you know, a duplicate of the Plague Marines. In this one, we get a duplicate of the Poxwalkers we've already made. So, yes. So it's basically more information on Poxwalkers in this magazine, a bit more fluff and history. And then exactly the same how to make and paint Poxwalkers that you've had in the previous magazine. So they are exactly the same figures, so it's basically exactly the same steps. So I'm not going to show these guys because we've done that in part 3A and 3B. We've shown you how to make the Poxwalkers, so there's nothing new there apart from shading, which we'll go through in this episode anyway. And then more gameplay stuff, more sort of tips and tricks and rules. Just gradually, if you are interested in the game side, it is gradually introducing you to the game in each issue, giving you more things to do and more missions, and you're kind of going backwards and forwards. So, I mean, I'm going to obviously play the game at some point, but for the point of this series is to show you the building and the painting. But yeah, there is gameplay stuff in there, so if that's what you're collecting this for, it should be quite up your street. And then last of all, yes, this is the nice one of this month. This is the bonus, the sort of the prime booty of this month's issues. We have our Myphitic Blight-Hauler, our first vehicle. Yeah, and it's like a Robin Reliant with a demon inside it and all the weapons in the world, and it's made of death and plague and horribleness. And we'll look at that in a moment. So we have a load of blurb about the Myphitic Blight-Hauler, which looks fantastic. It's a really quite nice chunky kit. We have a bit more fluff story. We have the how to build the Myphitic Blight-Hauler. And the painting, and again it's going to follow all the same sort of similar procedures because we're using all the same colours we've used before. And then you've got more gameplay stuff at the back, so lots of lovely things. So that's our issues for this month. Let's have a quick look at the sprues, and then we'll get on with some painting and building and all that and everything. Okay, to start with, in issue 7 we get 2 wonderful shades. There's a reason these are called Talent in a Bottle. You get Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil, a dark colour and a brown colour. This is kind of like almost black but not quite, and this is an earthy brown colour. I love these. We don't get to use them quite as much as I'd hoped in this next batch of 4 magazines, so in this video, but we get to use them a bit, so you get to see how they're done. Next up, in issue 8 we get this beautiful figure, and this base. It is the Librarian, and it's a fantastic looking sculpt. It's a dude with his big wavy power sword and his big flowy greatcoat, whilst he's in full power armour, of course. And this looks absolutely fantastic. The sculpting is beautiful, lovely crisp details. Again, it's not the usual Games Workshop plastic, so it's a little more crispy and not brittle, but it's harder than Games Workshop plastic, so I'm not quite sure what's going on with these. Whether these are manufactured off-site by someone else, I don't know how it works. Anyway, yes, this is the Librarian. Now, he has got this big flowing greatcoat, and this gives us a unique challenge, which is how to fill the seam line that will be down either side, and I'll show you how to do that. It's dead easy, just takes a little bit of sandy, but I'll explain it as we go. Next up, issue 9, and yes, it's 6 more Poxwalkers. Yes, it's the same 6 Poxwalkers as before. Now, it's not the end of the world. They are beautiful little sculpts. You are going to get some duplications. The bigger you make your army, the more chances are you're going to end up duplicating some of the figures, because there's only so many figures available to you. Now, we can't really do much with these to make them different, because they're monopost figures. You can't change them out and swap weapons around and things, not without major surgery. There's not really a lot we can do. So hopefully later on we'll be able to colour the sort of trousers and bits of cloth and stuff in our own colours, and then we can get a bit experimental and do all different things and differentiate them that way. But it's the same 6 guys, never mind. And then finally in issue 10 we have this rather lovely looking Myphitic Blight-Hauler. Yes, I'm loving the look of this. It comes with a specific base. It's got 3 little attachment points. Not often you see that, but there you go. And this thing is just an absolute darling. Look at that. It's basically a machine that's inhabited by the soul of a demon, and the soul kind of volunteers to inhabit this machine. So it's kind of machine and squishy fleshy stuff. It's an absolutely delightful casting. There's so much detail, like on the little tracks and wheels here. Tons of little bits and things to look at. It's going to be great fun to paint that. I really hope that throughout the course of these magazines they go into great detail about the painting, and they go into real depth with the skills and things that you're going to do, because to leave this as just a bog standard flat simple paint job, yeah, I'd be stripping it down and repainting it once the project's over, I think. Yes, but that looks fantastic. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's one of the easy build kits, so it's just a few snap fit parts, no glue required. Now, before we get going, one last quick thing. We need to talk about primer. If you remember in the last 2 episodes, I used Chaos Black Rattlecan primer on all the models before I painted them. They don't tell you this in the magazine because they can't ship aerosol cans to you, but they have you painting on the bare plastic. Every time you paint directly onto bare plastic, a kitten loses its wings. You must always prime your model. Now, last time we rattle canned them with the Chaos Black because that's the only can I had available at that particular time. And then we had to brush paint over the Death Guard Green or the Macragge Blue to get them the right colour. We're not going to do that this time because we have Macragge Blue and Death Guard Green as primers. The good thing about the Citadel paint range is that they also have lots of rattle can colours that match their main colours. So they have things like Death Guard Green and Macragge Blue, there's Lead Belcher, there's some others as well. There's quite a few, Mephiston Red, all the sort of the most popular colours for things they have as rattle cans, and they match the paint. So what we're going to do, because I've got these now, instead of taking them outside and priming them black and then bringing them back in and brush painting the blue and the green all over them, and it takes like a day, we're going to prime them in Death Guard Green for the Chaos and Macragge Blue for the Ultramarines. So you don't have to do this. If you want to use a different primer, you can do. just be aware, whatever primer you do use, if it's not one of these, you'll still need to go ahead and then brush paint the Death Guard green or the Macragge blue paint over the top. If you do it this way, you can save yourself a lot of time. Now, they're not cheap, they are expensive. You can get them from your local Warhammer store or online at the Games Workshop website. They're not cheap, but they'll save you a lot of time. That's what I'm going to do for this one. So we're not going to be brush painting the green and blue, just to save me time. Anyway, let's crack on with some buildy. Okay, so we'll make a start first of all with the Librarian, get him out of the way first. Now, I have covered off how to build the miniatures in the second episode of this series, so do go and check that out if you haven't already. So first of all, we need to get the bits off the sprue, so get your nippers. And what you want to do is you want to leave a little tiny bit of the gate, which is not the part, it's a bit of the sprue, on the piece. We're going to clean that off later. The reason you do that is just to make sure that when you cut it off the sprue, you don't leave any damage, any scratches or gouges in the plastic. Okay, once you've got the part off the sprue, all you need to do is clean up this little nub mark with your sharp blade. If you're a younger builder, you might want to get an adult to do this for you. Now, I do it towards myself, but I've been doing this for a million years. If you are starting out and you're an older builder, just kind of try and do it away from yourself, just to avoid stabbing yourself in the entire person. All you do is you take your blade, you lay it flat against the surface as best you can, depending on the surface, and you want to slide it across. Now, you don't want to cut the nub off all in one go. You want to shave it down. Now, you'll see I'm anchoring my fingers together here. That's so if I slip, I don't stab myself in the thumb. So there are ways to do this, but I do recommend doing it that way. So all we're going to do is slide this over and very gently just slice away in very thin layers, just until you've got rid of a big chunk of that nub and there's not much left. Once we've shaved that down, we can go in with our files or with our sanding sticks and just very gently get that flat and smooth. So although we might still be able to see it, the important thing is we can't feel it. I tend to go with the metal file first and then go in with a soft medium sanding sponge just to smooth it off. Okay, once we've got all the nubs removed and sanded away, we need to take care of any seam lines, and you can see one on the leg here. It goes right down the middle. It's just where the two halves of the mold come together, and you're always going to get that, so we need to clean that off. I'm going to use the Citadel seam line or mold line removal tool. Other tools are available. This is a brilliant tool. All you do is gently drag it along the seam line carefully, and it will remove that seam line completely. I'm not putting any pressure. And then once you've scraped it away, take your reasonably soft or medium sanding sponge and just gently sand that smooth. There you go, done. Okay, if you want to get a bit more advanced with your mould line removal, you might find occasionally, like on this backpack here, you have a mould line that goes into a small recess, and you can't really get the mould line removal tool in there. Now, you could just go at it with your hobby knife, with your craft blade, but it can make a bit of a mess. So if you've got one, it's worth picking up a scribing tool. This is the Tamiya scribing tool. This is designed for when you're making a model and perhaps you sand an area and get rid of a panel line in the model. This is designed for putting the panel line back in again. But you can also use it just to kind of really scribe out any little recessed seam lines like that. It'll just give you a slightly cleaner, neater removal than a blade, which might carve everything up. You have to be gentle, don't go in hardcore, just drag it across gently using the weight of the scriber to get rid of it. Okay, so with all the cleanup done, it's now time to get onto the building. Now what I try and do, normally when I get somebody with a great coat or a big flowy cloak or something like this, is I try to build the upper and lower halves of the body separate. So the legs and lower torso are on the base, and the upper torso and the arms and the cloaky, coaty thing is separate, and I can get in there and paint later on. Unfortunately, with this guy, you can't do that. There's no way to separate the legs from the coat. So we're just going to have to build it as it is, and then hope when it comes to painting later on that it's not a complete living nightmare. So let's get that done. For this, I'm going to be using my Tamiya extra thin cement. You've seen me use it before. It's a thin watery cement. What we need to do is glue the two legs onto this lower cloak part that has the crotch as well. There's two legs. There's one with a big gouge taken out the back. That's his left leg. And there's this one which is solid, and that's his right leg. So we need to get the right leg on here first of all. So all we're going to do here is I'm going to use two types of glue. I'm going to use my Tamiya thick cement as well. Now I've explained this before. Basically, extra thin cement is great for getting into little recesses. The thick cement is what you want to use when you need it to stick for a second first. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the glue in shot. We're going to get a bit of the thick cement on there first, just a tiny amount, and we're going to stick that on there. Now the reason I'm using this is because this will have, it's a thicker cement, it doesn't melt the plastic as much, but it does stick more for a second. If I'd used extra thin, I couldn't do that. So that's on there very loosely. I'm going to get the extra thin, and just as an extra bit of security, I'm going to run that along the gap here. Now the extra thin is a true welding cement. It will seep between the two pieces of plastic, and apologies, I'm getting my hand right in shot. It'll seep between the two pieces of plastic. I'll put the glue over there, shall I? Move the glue over that side. There we go, that's better. Yeah, it seeps between the gap and welds the plastic together. So that's that piece on. So what I'll do again, I'll take a little bit of the thick cement, touch it there. Now this is going to be inside the cloak, and you're not really going to see the joint here, so it's not the end of the world if you get a bit messy with the glue. So that goes on there like that. Next we have the back panel here, and this sort of vent on the back of the coat, which kind of looks like, when you get it in place, gives you a cool kind of vented effect. All vintage greatcoats have that, this kind of vent effect. Now this isn't a structural, it's not carrying any weight, so what I can do is put it there, get my extra thin cement, and just touch it to the gap. Now next, what we need to do is take the front of the armour, which is this chest piece, and this will glue on. How does this glue on? This glues on thusly, like that. It just locks into place. That goes into the side there, and the cod piece goes into that little gap there, and it sits over the leg like that. So what I'm going to do with this first, just to get it in, get my extra thin and just run it here. Just a touch, I don't need a lot. I want it to suck into the gap. Now this is structural, I would rather use the thick glue, but thick glue on there is going to make a right mess. And we're just going to have to trust that it'll hold its own weight for a second. Then I can get the thin glue again and run it in here. Just make sure that's all secured. This is inside the guy, so you can get quite generous with the glue inside here, it doesn't really matter. So we need to glue this together now, and this should be nice and straightforward. It just slots on the front there. And then what I can do is get my extra thin, my lovely, lovely extra thin, run it inside the neck area here, because you're never going to see that. Once the head's on there, you're not going to see it. Run it inside the arms, bit in there. When you make Warhammer, eventually you'll learn what things you can get messy with, because there are certain things you'll never see. You'll never actually see them. So get some glue in there and hold that for a second. Now you can see it's pushed that apart there. That's fine. To get that some glue in there, we need to stick that together. Now we need to hold it for a second, just to let it all grab and get some tooth. And like I said, this cement welds the plastic. What it does, it melts the polystyrene. Oops, it melts the polystyrene and makes a proper weld. Now what we're going to do is we're going to run some extra over here, and we're going to clamp it with our hands again. That's on. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some masking tape, and it's ordinary Tamiya masking tape. I'm going to take some of this, and what I'm going to do is very gently, but firmly but gently, wrap this around so it holds everything together while that glue does its work. Oops, it's not easy when it's not a straight surface. There we go. Just means it'll help it stop it popping apart. And I'm going to leave this for 5 or 10 minutes, just long enough that everything sticks. And while it's doing that, of course, I'm going to go in and run some glue down the inside. Now don't worry about the glue sticking to the masking tape. Like I said, the glue melts plastic, it doesn't stick to paper, so you're absolutely fine. Okay, apologies, that last section was out of focus and all the way down here. I do apologise. It was all done in one take, and it gets easy to get carried away when you're doing stuff like sticking things together, so sorry about that. Anyway, advanced technique time. You look here, you can see we have a horrible, horrible seam line right down there, and right down there where the two halves stuck together. Now, if you look in the magazine, they haven't done anything with it. You can see the seam line going down there, and it looks pants. It looks terrible. It's not the kind of seam line that you can excuse away as, say, an actual real seam in a jacket or a coat. It just looks like you've stuck the two halves together. And you can even see where they've trimmed a nub and not done a very good job of sanding it. So, we're going to do better than that. We're going to make this disappear. Now, you can use things like fillers and stuff like that and putties to hide all these seams, but that's far too complex. We want to keep it simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to use a wonderful thing called Sprue Goo. And you can see it's homemade. What is Sprue Goo? Sprue Goo is basically Tamiya extra thin, a welding cement, with lots and lots and lots and lots of bits of sprue. Literally the sprue that your parts come on, dumped into it. And all you do is you take your bits of sprue. You can use plastic card as well, but it doesn't really matter. As long as it's polystyrene cement, it has to be the kind of plastic that this glue melts. All you do is you get your bits of sprue. If I can get this lid off, and I'll just make sure it's not a drip anywhere. You get your bits of sprue and you just dump them into the glue. Like that. Oops. And sometimes they get stuck on the lid and it's a real pain because you've got to pull them off. And all you do is you dump them in. Now you'll need to put a lot in there. And what will happen is over about half an hour, it'll dissolve all the polystyrene you put in there. And eventually it will dissolve down into this goo, which I just showed then. It's like literally this thick, gloopy goo. And the trick is, how much do you put in? Well, you put in enough so that when you pull the brush out, it does that. It doesn't drip off the end. It wants to be thick enough that it just kind of hangs there. And what you've basically done is made a filler out of polystyrene. So when we come to use it on this, instead of using like a putty or an epoxy filler that's going to be a totally different material from the plastic of the kit, we're actually filling a polystyrene kit with polystyrene. So how do you use sprue glue? Using sprue glue is dead easy. All we're going to do is take the piece, we're going to use the brush that comes with it, get some of it off, and we're just going to touch and dab to the piece like this. You don't need to use a massive amount, just touch it and dab it. And what you want to do is make a bead of sprue goo that covers the seam line you're trying to fill. Now sprue goo works for little tiny seams like this. If it was a big, massive gap, then it probably would be a bit too thin. You'd have to use proper fillers. But for things like this, where it's a quick seam, just dot it on. And that's as complicated as it gets. I need to leave that now for 24 hours. It's a bit of a pain. It is a slow process. What will basically happen is that over the next few hours, the glue, the Tamiya extra thin that was in there, will flash off and evaporate away, which is what it does, leaving behind the polystyrene. Because it's the Tamiya extra thin, of course, it's slightly dissolved the plastic of the kit. It'll leave the polystyrene, which is already dissolved anyway, that's in the sprue goo. That will blend in with the plastic in the kit. The polystyrene in the goo will be left behind, and basically when it's dried, you'll have a bead of polystyrene filling a gap in a polystyrene model. What that means is when it's all fully cured and dried, you can sand it and you can scribe panel lines into it and everything you want to do as if it was just a piece of the kit. It's the most sandable, most scribable way of filling a model. And it's also super easy. You've just seen me do it. So I need to leave this for 24 hours. You can probably work it and sand it a bit after about 3 or 4 hours, but just to be safe, leave it 24 hours. Okay, so it's been about 24 hours and that's all now cured and dried. And you can see there we've got this nice bead of polystyrene on top of polystyrene, filling that gap. Now what we need to do is start to sand and file this away to get rid of the bead and just have it filling the gap. Smooth it all down basically, a bit like this. You can see here the sprue goo has been sanded away and now we've just got the sprue goo remaining where the line and the gap was. And other than that, it's smooth as you can imagine. What you need is some of your favourite sanding tools basically. I've got a small metal file and I've got a couple of sanding sticks. Now, as with most sanding stick manufacturers, they very rarely tell you what grit any of these are, so I can't tell you. Other than I know that I think this one's 180, it's an ultimate sanding stick. This one's 180 grit, and this one is, I don't know, it's good luck trying to find that out. It's medium, it's very gentle. It's more like it's not really got much bite to it at all. So what do we do? Well, very simple. First thing we need to do is, you can start off with just a 180 grit sander if you want. It'll just take you a long time. What you can do is go in with your very gentle file and just start to file away very gently. I'm putting no pressure on. Just start to file away to try and get rid of most of the bead of glue. Now what you want to do, this is a reasonably flat surface, but there is a curve, so what I need to do is make sure I'm curving this to match that curve, because I don't want to flatten out bits that are curved. Some bits are flat anyway, but I don't want to flatten everything. After a little while of filing, you'll have got that big bulb of polystyrene and glue down to a minimal level. There's still some little bits there you can see that are shiny, because the inflexible file can't get in that little recess because it's curved. So the next step is to move in with the 180 grit sanding sponge. And very much like with the file, what you want to do here is you want to start off in a single direction. Now because this is curved, it will conform to this surface a bit better, but it's got less work to do. You could start with this, but it would take you approximately forever. And what you want to do again is stick to your sanding in one direction and curve it to follow this curve here, and just go, not gently this time, a little bit more pressure this time, but not too much. Now because this is also finer than the file, we're upping the grit. We're going from, that could be, I don't know, 80 grit or whatever that would be. We're now increasing the grit on the sanding. The basic rule of thumb is, the higher the grit number, the finer the sanding you're doing. And you start off not fine, and you work your way up to very fine. That's how you get nice clean sanding with no sanding marks. So all this is doing is still taking some of this off, but it's also getting rid of all the little scratches that this file put in. Okay, so now that's looking a lot more level, but we need to clean up all these sanding marks because there's still lots of scratches all over this. So what I'm going to do now is come back in again, but you see this is a bit damaged at this end. That's great because I can squish it. I need to start doing circular motions very gently. I'm doing circular motions, and what I'm doing here is a bit like when you go in different directions that way and then this way. I'm just adding even more scratches and marks, so that really you can't really see an individual scratch because it's hidden by all the millions of other scratches going in all different directions. Okay, so that's looking a lot less scratchy. So last we need to do now is come in with the even finer grit, the higher number. I don't know what grit this is. It might be 1200 grit, I don't know. And we do exactly the same, just doing in the circular motions, but this one we can go quite quickly. You can go backwards and forwards or go in circular motions. This one now, we've done all the sanding to get rid of all the lumps and bumps. This is purely sanding to remove sanding marks left by this. And there we are. Now what you can do is you can hold this up to the light. Now it won't come out on camera, probably because I'm holding it in the wrong place. If you hold this up to the light, what you can see, you might not see it here, but where there used to be a seam right down there, there's now nothing whatsoever. It's absolutely vanished. Okay, so with those seams filled in, we can crack on with the rest of the assembly, and it's all really straightforward. First off, we're going to get the head on. Now you've got a choice of the helmeted or not helmeted head. I've chosen for the helmeted head because I'm lazy really. I don't really want to have to paint a face. So dead simple. I'm using the Tamiya extra thin glue here. Just get a little bit of glue in there and smop that in there and just push it down, and it should lock into place if I get it in the right place. Oops. Come on, in you go. In you go. You've got a few seconds while the glue is setting to position the head where you want it to be looking. I think I'll have it looking that way. For the backpack, nice and simple. That tab goes in that hole. Now this is a bit more of a, it's got some supporting structure there. It's got a bit of weight to it. So I'm going to use the Tamiya thick glue for this. Just put a dot on that. And like I said before, it's purely because this gives it some sticky stick and it'll stay in place. I could use the extra thin, but it would probably just fall straight off again. It takes a little while to set, so with the thick glue I can get it on there straight away. Okay, next up we have the left hand, and for this we first of all need to glue the hand onto the arm, and it just sits on like that. So nice and simple. We'll get a little bit of extra thin. It's not a massive load bearing supporting area, so we can afford to use just the extra thin. Just get that on there. How's that go on? Get that on there like that. Okay, now next up we need to glue on these tubes that go around under his arms. However, it's a bit too fiddly for me to film it, so I did that one, but we've had a disaster. This is the other tube. Yeah, it totally snapped. They're very, very delicate tubes, and this one, I couldn't figure out how to make it fit, and it snapped. There's no real way for me to get that on there. I'll give it a try once the arm is in place, if I can fudge it slightly. But I don't mind if I just have one missing, it's fine. So just be careful when you're putting these tubes on. Don't get them mixed up, they're different, so you need to make sure you get the right one on the right side. But yeah, just be careful with them, they snap very easily. However, less of a disaster. We can add in the purity seals. So this one, which has 3 of the seals, just goes on the side there. Now I've put these on after these tubes just to get them out of the way, so they're not getting in the way of each other. I can put that on and apply a little tiny bit of glue. We have one on the other side, which again is this one has just 2 purity seals, and that goes on there like that. Now it's important you do these before the arms, purely because once the arm is in place, it'll be a bit tricky to get to these little holes. So just make sure you do these ones, the purity seals and these tubes, before you even attempt the arms. So I say I'm going to try and put this tube on after I've glued the arm on. We'll see how that goes. Next we've got the arms, and these should be very straightforward. Holes and pegs. The pegs fit the holes, so all I'm going to do is I'm going to use the thick glue because I want it to stay in place quickly. A little bit of thick glue there, just a tiny amount, and simply slot the arm in. Thick glue on here. Just a tiny amount, just enough to give some grip and stick. Like I said, do these bits after you've done the cables and the purity seals, or in my case, after you've broken one of the cables, so you've got one of the cables on. When the arms are on, go back in with your extra thin and just run it in. You don't have to do this, it's just a bit of extra security. Okay, pauldrons are easy. You have this bit here. When you're cutting these arms off the sprue, by the way, you don't have to worry about cleaning up these sort of shoulder parts here, because they're always going to get covered up with pauldrons on Space Marines. So you know the drill by now. Extra thick glue, or I say it's fat glue or extra thick glue, it's just regular Tamiya cement, it's not the extra thin. Make sure your pauldron is the right way around. Right way around. So it goes like that. You've got the bottom bit here. Stick that on there. Now this arm is the one that has the skull and horns on it, so make sure you get the right pauldron on the right shoulder and the left pauldron on the left shoulder. Hey, you know what I mean. So touch of that, and he is in. So both pauldrons on. He's looking pretty mint now. Both pauldrons on. A couple of things left to stick on. That's the purity seals that go on his backpack, the crest that goes on the top of his thing above the helmet, and I'll see if I can repair that tube. I doubt I'll be able to, but if I can, it'll be fine. If I can't, I'm not really fussed. He looks fine without a tube around his arm. Now you will notice I've not glued him to the base. Very good reason for that. You won't be able to get the brush in there to paint him very easily once he's glued down. So I'm leaving him off for now, so that when we come to paint him, when we get the paints, we can easily get a brush in there. Get him fully painted, then we can glue him to the base. So I'll go and get those last bits stuck on. But it's time now to move on to the next build, which is the Myphitic Blight-Hauler. Ew. Okay, now I'm going to skip ahead and go straight to issue 10. I'm not going to show you how to make the Poxwalkers, because we covered that in episodes 3A and 3B, the building and the painting of those. And those are exactly the same guys, so there's no point showing the same thing again. We're going to move straight on to the Myphitic Blight-Hauler now, so let's get this thing built. Start off by putting this little track in here, like this, you'll see, which should fit in. Now this is all going to be snap fit, there's no gluey required in this at all. Might have a little bit of seams to fill here and there, but hopefully this should all just snap together quite nicely. So now we need to put this half of the body together. Next we have to add the facey parts. Okay, I say facey parts, they could be assy parts for all I know. They're just going to go on there like that. Next up we have to snap together some tracks. Now do pay attention to these, because these are chiral, which means one has a left side, and one has a right side. By the way, there is one thing that I've learned about these Chaos kits. They're full of spiky things, and I'll tell you what, spiky things really hurt. Next up we need to insert the tracks into these things that I thought looked like eyes, are not actually eyes. So just push those in there. A little bit of bushy. If it wants to go in, does it want to go in? It wants to go in. Come on, you want to go in. It's finding some part of it that isn't covered in spikes and painful. Ow. There we go. So now we've got 2 tracks on there. Look at the face. Face only a mother could love. Next up, we have to start putting some of the weapons on the front part. So we have the missiles that go on this side. We'll get these 2 bits together for the melter, or whatever the chaos equivalent of a melter is. Now, make note here, there is a seam line here as well, because it's 2 halves, and we'll sort that out again later. And this now just needs to get that flash off there. This just needs to slot into here. There we go. I'm going to show you a cool way to paint this when we get around to painting that as well. Next, we just have to stick these on the top here, and there's only 1 hole, and it goes into this top peg, and it slides over that bit there. It's like a layered bit of armour. It's kind of cool. There we go. See, it layers the armour there, which is quite nice. Then we just need to put the front plate on here. Now this is a bit fiddly to get all the pegs and holes lined up. Takes a couple of goes. We'll just shove that on. Make sure the tracks are in these kind of funky retro mudguards. We just need to stick it on the base now. Now what you're going to do is it will fit onto the base with these 3 pegs. Peg, peg, peg. Hole, hole, hole. However, these are very tight. What I would suggest, because we're going to need to take this off the base to paint it, get your knife and just get it in the hole and spin the knife around a little bit, just like that. Do it in all 3 holes. And the reason you want to do this is so that when I put this in now, it's a nice loose fit. And there you are, it's on the base. But because those pegs are now a little looser, because I widened the holes, I can easily remove the base and take it off to paint it. And there we have the Myphitic Blight-Hauler. Dead simple build, dead good fun. Now there are some little bits we need to fill in. I'll be filling in the front of the melter here, and maybe this little scope bit. And also this mud guard on the back, I need to just fill that in a little bit. I'm going to use exactly the same method as I did on the Librarian, bit of Sprue Goo, let it settle for 24 hours and then just sand it back. So I'm not going to show you that again. So when we next see this, we'll get it primed up and we'll have those gaps filled in. So let's crack on now with all the priming and painting. Next, it's time to get some paint on these guys. So what we need to do first of all, if you remember watching the previous episode, the first thing you need to do is prime your models ready for paint. Paint doesn't stick to plastic, primer does. If you've not watched episodes 3A and 3B, go and watch them. It does explain about primer. The magazines don't tell you to prime them, but I am. I'm saying prime it, otherwise the paint won't stick to your models. You have to prime it. Now I've used the Games Workshop Macragge Blue and Death Guard Green Rattle Can primers. It took me 5 minutes to get these primed, and it leaves them the colour I was going to base coat them anyway. So I don't need to base coat them with a brush. They're primed in the right colour. However, if you're using a different primer, a different colour, that's fine, no problem. You'll just need to go ahead and brush paint on the Death Guard Green and the Macragge Blue. 2 coats is usually enough, you should be fine. Thin your paint a little bit and make sure you get a nice solid coverage. You'll also need all the paints we've got so far. That's the Abaddon Black, Bugman's Glow, Death Guard Green, Macragge Blue, Retributor Armour and Lead Belcher. And you'll also need the 2 shades that we've received this month, Null Oil and Agrax Earthshape. We'll have some fun with those. And last of all, don't forget, of course, your wet palette. I did explain in episode 3B what a wet palette is and how to make one, but if you haven't watched that, don't worry, I'll put a link up here. Go and watch that video. It tells you how to make one of these things and why you need it. A wet palette will make your painting a billion times better. It will keep your paints hydrated so your paints don't dry out. So don't use a plate or a bit of paper or card or a palette book or anything like that for your palette. Make yourself a wet palette. It will cost you pence and it will make your painting much, much better. Now you will notice I've mounted this guy on a stick. We want to be able to paint under here, and I said before I wasn't going to glue him to the base because we need to get under his coat. So what I've done is I took a small pin vise, which is a small hand drill. I drilled a tiny hole in the base of his heel in that leg, so it could go up into his leg and not be visible ever. I've taken a cocktail stick and snipped the end off and just jammed that in there, and I've fixed it in place with some white glue. It's also called PVA glue. That's been glued into there. And at this end of the cocktail stick, I left the pointy stabby end, and I've just jammed it into a wine cork. That's just it's got a plastic lid. If you can get the wine corks with the plastic bottom bits, they're great because you can stand them up like that. But if not, just any bit of cork, I've just jammed it in there. So basically I can now paint him, and I can get in there to paint the inside of his coat. Handy little trick for you. Okay, first up on the Librarian, we've got all the black areas, so that's things like the joints for the undersuit for his armour, which are on the elbows and knees. So bits in there. The knees are hard to get to, but if you're careful, you can get round the back of the knees. We've got this little belt here, which I assume is part of his reliquary, so we've got to make sure that's nice and black. And we've also got all the tubes that come out from the gauntlet. Now you might end up painting some on this ribbed tube as well, but don't worry about that, that's fine, because we're going to paint that a different colour later. There's also the palm for his power armour hand, whatever you want to call that, under there. And I'm actually going to paint the top of his helmet here, because there will be other colours to come later, but there's like this sort of skull cap on his helmet. I'm going to paint that black as well. Next up is all the gold trim, and that means things like the Aquila on the chest here. We have all the stuff on the pauldrons, all the embossed detail, and lots of little reliquary items on the belt. So just take your time with those, carefully get them brushed in. Try and be neat as you can, but if you do make a mess or get any gold paint on the blue, like if you're doing this bit here, just go and touch it in with the Macragge blue once the gold has dried. So work your way around, refer to the magazine, it'll show you where you need to paint, and get all your gold bits painted. This will take 2 not very thick coats. Okay, so that's all the gold done. Now you can see I've been a bit messy here on the blade, but that's fine, because we're going to paint this lead belcher first and then go back and paint the gold bits. It's just easier to do it that way. So I'm not really too fussed about this. That's going to be covered over. And I've got a few spots of gold here and there on other bits of the figure, but that's where I'm going to paint lead belcher and other colours later on, so I'm not too fussed. Next is the actual lead belcher, so we're going to get some on our brush and get painting. So it's things like the Force sword blade. Obviously that's going to be lead belcher, and I'm going to paint the belt buckle, which is why I've not painted the gold bit here, because I want to paint the belt buckle all over silver first, because I like my Space Marines to have silver belt buckles. I don't know why. So I'm going to paint that silver first and then go back and paint the skull gold, and other little bits and bobs around the head. And with that done, all the base colour painting on this figure is pretty much complete for this episode. Now there are a few wiggly lines here and there. It's not 100% perfect, but that doesn't matter, because before we finish this episode we'll have done all the shades, and as I've said before, shades hide all your sins. So this guy is done. We'll do some shades in a bit. For the moment we need to go off and get cracking on the Myphitic Blight-Hauler. So let's go and get that ready. Okay, so we're back down on the table for this because it's a bit of a bigger model, and you can see I've got the scruffy painting mat out. Yeah, it's not my clean mat. Now, we're going to get painting on this fella. Now you can see I've taken him apart a little bit, and that's just to make it a little easier to paint some of the hard to get to areas, like inside the mouth and these mandibles and stuff. It all goes back together again, no problem. That's the beauty of a push fit kit. Now the first colour we're going to do is Bugman's Glow, and that's for all these fleshy parts. This is a hybrid of a machine and a sort of monstery demon thing, so it's got fleshy bits, and it's all the main sort of under the carapace here, all these squishy fleshy bits. There are some bits around the weapons as well, and they're quite small areas, so have a look through the magazine, and there's lots of photographs that show you all the different fleshy bits that you need to paint the right colours. So we'll get those done now. So I've got some Bugman's Glow on my wet palette, I'm going to get some on the brush, and we'll get cracking. As always, add a little tiny bit of water to your paint just to make it flow better, and crack on. Now don't worry too much if you get paint, like I've said before, if you get paint on bits where it doesn't need to be. Try and keep your paint to the fleshy blobby bits, but if you do get any on the metal areas or the areas that need to be green, just go back in and touch those up later on. Like this bit here is going to be lead belcher, so it doesn't matter if you get paint on that because we haven't painted it yet. But this carapace here is going to remain green, so don't worry if you get paint on that. If you do, just go back in and touch it in with your Death Guard green. The advantage of these rattle cans is that they are exactly the same colour as the paint. Okay, with the fleshy colour on there now, it's looking pretty minging and horrible. Next colour, we need to go in with the lead belcher, and this is for lots of parts all over the whole vehicle now. So we've got things like these vents here. We have these strips and tubes. There's bits all over the model, so basically have a look through the magazine. See where it shows you painting the silver parts, the entire tread assembly and the wheels and everything else, they're all lead belcher, and all these assemblies here. So just have a look through the magazine, go through and see where everything that needs to be lead belcher, and just get that on. Okay, so that's all the metallic bits painted. You can see here the bits that I have actually done. On the mandibles, I followed the magazine and just painted the 4 at the front, not the rest of the teeth. And there's all the bits of metalwork here. Now I have painted these little bits inside these tubes. Now the tubes themselves are going to be painted a different colour, but I just wanted to paint the metallic bits in there to start with. So any bits where there's a tube and it's ripped open and there's little sort of metallic bits inside, they've been painted as well. On the front, you've just got the missiles and the fairing around the weapon here, and bits of the fairing and the muzzles at the front. So nothing much on there. On this piece you have the entire track unit and the arm that holds it in, and just that bit in the middle. Then on the front armour you've just got the eye on the front. So they are all painted. What is next? Next is, as I've said before, my favourite colour. It's gold. Yes, we're going to be doing all the gold trim. Now again, look through the magazine, but you've basically got all the trim around the armour parts. You've got all these bits of sticky up trim here. And that's really it for this particular model. It's just little spanky stuff on the armour, like all these bits of markings, chaos markings, and the trim around there. So we're going to get all these painted. We're just going to be using our Retributor armour, as always, and a little bit of water on the wet palette, and just work our way through these. So, nothing really to explain too much here. Just go ahead, get it on. Okay, so that's the gold trim painted. So you can see there's not a lot. There's the top bit here and some trim on this rear fender. There's the trim on the weapons there and that bit of the muzzle. All this lovely trim on there, and I can't help thinking that looks like a pair of angry eyes and 2 eyebrows, but it's not, because that's the eye there. And there was nothing on that bit. So that's that bit done, the gold trim done, and I do love my gold. Next up, just one little last bit on here. There's only really 3 steps left to go now on this whole series of issues. We've got to paint some of the black tubing and black bits. Now on the mandibles here, we've got these arms here, which apparently are supposed to be painted black, and I'm going to follow the magazine. I'm not sure black's the best colour for them, but we'll follow the magazine. There are some bits of tubes here and there, see if we can find them. The tubes here that have the little holes in with the metal bits in the middle, we need to paint these black, but make sure we leave the metal bits in the middle. And there's a couple there, there's one on the side, the little bits here and there, tubes. There are 2 tiny tubes, you can see them here on the underside of this bit of the carapace, and same again on here. I think those are tubes. Are they tubes? Yes, there's tubes between the spoilers or the fenders and the centre of the hull there, so we need to get those painted. And also we need to get the teeth. Again, it says the teeth are supposed to be painted black here. I don't really think that's the best colour, but again, I'm just going to follow what the magazine does. So we're going to get these painted black. So we're going to go in with the Abaddon black, and we're just simply going to carefully get these painted along. Okay, so that's all the little black bits done, and that is now all the painting on this little fellow, for the time being, done. So there's only one real step we have to do now, and that is shades. We need to do our Agrax Earth Shade and our Nuln Oil, and this is the fun bit. This is talent in a bottle. These are called talent in a bottle, and you'll find out why. Now, there are several ways you can use shades. They're basically washes. It's a wash of colour, and you can use it for a number of different things. You can use it to accentuate recessed details and panel lines. You can use it to change the overall colour of a model. You can use it a lot of different ways, but the way we're going to do it is we're going to use it as a wash, and we're going to be putting the Nuln Oil and the Agrax Earth Shade over different coloured areas. Now, typically, what we have is 2 shades. Nuln Oil is a dark bluey black sort of oily colour, and Agrax Earth Shade is a more browny sort of earthy tone. This is brilliant for golds and browns, or for giving metals a dirty look, and this is perfect for giving sort of silvers a darker colour, a more sort of used metallic colour. And what we're going to do on this and on all the figures we've painted so far, every single one, is dead simple. Anything that's silver, been painted with the lead belcher, we're going to give a shade of Nuln Oil. Anything that's been painted gold with the Retributor armour, we're going to give a shade of Agrax Earth Shade. And for the time being, that's as much as we're going to do. It's just these 2 colours. Now, I will say from the start, I do it a slightly different way, but because I'm following the magazine, I'm going to assume, because I don't know what's coming up in future issues, I'm going to have to assume that good things are coming. So I will be doing, remember, separate videos of Lieutenant Calcius. I'm going to do a separate video of a chipping crate type thing and all kinds of bits and bobs that show you the more sort of the techniques I would use, the more hardcore professional techniques. But for these, we're going to follow the magazines, and it says for gold, use Agrax Shade, for silver, use the Nuln Oil. So how do you do this? Dead easy. Get yourself a brush. I find not a massive brush, but something like this. This is a base brush, is quite nice. Just something reasonably large. Now you have to give the shades a very good shake. And I mean a really good shake, because these shades, they will dry matte, but if you don't shake it, especially Agrax Shade, if you don't shake this and just put it straight on the model, it'll come out shiny because it's got a matting agent in there. You have to mix it in. So get your shade. Now you'll see me using this. This is just something that Mike Mountain, or Dad, you might know from the chats, made for me. It's just a thing to hold my shade bottle because I do tend to knock them over. But you don't have to have one of these. Just make sure if you're using a shade, just stick it down on a blob of blue tack on a piece of wood or something, or just mount it onto something so you can't knock it over. I've just got this little anti-spillage device here. How do you do shades? Shades are great fun. To just do an overall wash, what we want to do is we want to get the Agrax shade on here, get a good brushful, be generous with it, don't be delicate with it, and just brush it over the thing you want to colour. Now I'm going around the outside edges here as well. I want it to collect around the outside edges. It's going to make the gold look dirty, but it's also going to give a bit of shading to the edges, and it will dry a bit lighter than it looks when you first paint it on. So what you need to do first and foremost, like on these bits here, is just go around all the gold areas that you painted with Retributor armour, and this is on the figures as well, and just cover it in this. It's great fun. You can't go too wrong. The only thing to watch for is when you get it on there, be generous with it, but if it does start to pool up in areas, like it'll tend to pool up at the bottom of things, just make sure to brush it around a bit to avoid it pooling up too much. Okay, so the shade's had a chance to dry, about 20 minutes, half an hour, and you can see the kind of effect it's had. It just darkens down that gold and takes the shine off a bit and makes it look a bit more grubby and gruesome. Now, like I say, if this was just me painting this, there's a lot more I'd do. I'd be doing the same shade that I've done on the gold all over the green areas to get into all the recesses and make it look dirty and grubby, but they haven't told us to do that yet, so I assume they will at a later time. What I'm going to do though, I'm toying with the idea, when this whole thing is finished and we've done all the figures, if they're not quite up to the way I'd want to paint them, if there's been a lot of corners cut, because I don't know how simple this paint job is going to be. It could be they just give you really basic techniques and at the end of it you've kind of got a half-assed looking army. I don't know. If it comes out that way and at the end of it I've got two armies that I'm like, well, they look all right, but they're not brilliant. And when you see me do Lieutenant Calcius, you'll see the kind of effort I go to when I paint a figure. I'm toying with the idea of maybe even just stripping everything back to, you know, plastic and painting the whole thing properly. It would take me weeks and weeks and weeks to paint, you know, two massive armies. So I don't know. It might be by the end of these whole, you know, 80 issues, they might look fantastic enough to play on, you know, on the table. So we don't know. So next up, it's time to get on with the Nuln Oil. Now, Nuln Oil is fantastic. If the other one is Liquid Talent, this is Liquid Talent Plus. Same as before, get your Nuln Oil, get yourself your brush, and just get it on the model. Now in Nuln Oil you can be a little more generous if you want. This is a darker blacker colour, and what it will do, it will take your metallic colours, ooh, knocking the camera, sorry, I'll move that over there. You can take your colours and it'll go from looking like a metallic painted piece of plastic to an actual piece of metal. It will settle into all the recesses. It will, first of all, it will give the metal a slightly dirty tone on the surfaces, but it'll also settle into the recesses. Can't get my words out today. Settle into the recesses and give it a depth and a metallic sheen. And then what you would normally do is go over later on with a highlight colour just to pick out the edges and bring some definition back. But I'm assuming we're going to do that later on. It's not been told us to do that yet, so we haven't been told to do that. That was a really bad sentence. I do apologise. I'm having trouble speaking. So I'll go around and get all the metallic areas. This is just on all the bits you've painted lead belcher. Now this includes all the weapons that all the characters are carrying. So if it's the Space Marines with their bolt rifles or their bolt pistols, the Death Marines, Plague Marines with their equivalents of the bolt rifles, or even some of the Poxwalkers with their, you know, pieces of rebar with studs sticking out the end. Get them all coated quite generously in the Nuln Oil and give it about half an hour to dry before you go and do anything else. Okay, so you can see on this Space Marine the effect that the Nuln Oil and the Agrax Earthshade have on the metallic colours. Very nice, very nice. Bit of relief and depth there, a bit more interesting. But there's one last thing we need to do, and this is an advanced technique. If you remember, we haven't yet painted the casing on this weapon, which is supposed to be black. Now, you could just paint it with Abaddon black, but I'm going to show you a different technique that, if you get it just right, looks a bit more interesting. What you're going to do, instead of just painting it black, which just makes it look black, we're actually going to paint it with Nuln Oil. Why are we going to do this? Well, because it's easy. It's a lot easier to keep neat edges because it just flows around the edges. But also, if you only do a few coats, you can control how black it actually gets. So what we're going to do is just basically paint Nuln Oil, a bit too much there, onto the weapon casing. And then give it 5 or 10 minutes to dry. And then when it's dried, go and do another coat. And then another coat, and after about 3 coats or so, what you should find is, instead of being a wash, it's now actually darkened it enough that your weapon casing looks black, but not just solid black. It's got some slight variation to it, which looks a lot more interesting than just black. But again, because we're using this as a wash, or we're putting a wash on there, painting around these gold parts, you just touch it to the model and the wash flows towards the edge. You're not having to brush carefully around, so it's a very fast way of painting things black. Same, you can use it on boots and leather and all kinds of things, although I've just used it on the casing. So go ahead, paint on the black, do it all around the casing, paint on the Nuln Oil, give it 10 or 15 minutes to dry. You can hairdryer it or blow on it if you want. Do another coat, give it 3, maybe 4 coats until you're happy it's dark enough. And there you go, hopefully you can see that in this light. That's the effect you come out with. It's a nice little effect. That's 4 coats of Nuln Oil added on there. And now you can add more coats if you want to go even darker. I like this kind of level where it's just a subtle difference between the bare metal areas and that kind of casing. To me it looks, because it's a wash and it pulls away from the edges and you get sort of tonal variation, dark bits and light bits, it looks more like a metal part that's been plated or coated with something, and that coating's worn away around the edges and just looks faded and used. And later on, hopefully, if the magazine tells us to, we'll be doing some highlighting on the silver parts anyway, and that'll contrast even more between the dark area and the light area. So there you go. Nuln Oil, dead easy. It works its way around all the raised details on the Aquillas and stuff, so you don't have to worry about painting carefully, and it's a lot faster, a lot less fuss. So if you've got black things to paint, do consider you can paint it with black paint, but you can use Nuln Oil. With that done, and the librarian rather awkwardly placed here on top of his big stick on his little champagne cork, issues 7 to 10 are complete. Woohoo! Now we obviously need to wait for issues 11 to 14 to show up, so I can do those for you. In the meantime, you should have some nice looking figures, and if you're looking at playing the game, you can go along and follow the game tutorials in there and have some fun. But in the meantime, you should have some really nice figures. Now they are starting to look pretty good. There's still a lot of things I would have done so far. There's even with the limited paints and shades we've got, there's still things I would have done on here that they haven't asked us to do yet. And I don't know why. I don't know why that is. There are some little concerns I'm having. Like, I would have done a lot more shading with the Agrax Earthshade on these Chaos guys. But hey, I'm sure there's a reason. They'll come to it in the end. So for the moment, we're just following the magazine. Don't forget, of course, I will be filming standalone episodes for Lieutenant Calcius, and we're going to do the big shipping crate episode on its own as well. They'll come later on, and they'll be proper professional how to paint things properly episodes. So if you're happy just to paint along like this and follow the magazine, I don't know how these are going to finish up. They might finish up looking fantastic like they do on the cover of the magazine, proper heavy metal style, or they might look a bit half-arsed. I don't know. I don't think they're going to give you all the paints you would need to make an outstanding paint job, so we'll see how it goes. But yeah, do stay tuned for those other standalone episodes. I'm just waiting for issues 11 to 14 to show up, and then I can start work on those, and we'll carry on from there. But it just remains for me to say thank you so much for watching so far. Do stay tuned for the next episode. Don't forget, in the meantime, if you need any advice or any help on your Warhammer paintings, just drop me an email, fox@modelmakingguru.com, or put a comment on this video. I'm more than happy to help you out. Don't forget, of course, if you want help and advice, you can do no worse, we can do no better. I don't know what's the good phrase? You can do, the best thing you can do, let me put it that way, is join the Model Makers Boom Hut. Facebook.com/groups/Model Boom Hut. Brilliant place. Everybody's dead friendly. If you're just looking for help and advice and just people to show off your work to, everybody in the Boom Hut will more than happy to welcome you. So go and check it out in the Model Makers Boom Hut. Don't forget, of course, if you'd like to help keep this channel going and support this channel, as well as liking and subscribing to this channel as you do with all YouTube stuff, like this video, don't forget that bit. But also, if you'd like to, you can pop over to patreon.com/modelmakinguru and see if you'd like to help offer your support. My patrons do keep this channel going. They're my source of income and I love them dearly. So go and have a look, see if you can help out. But until next time, go play with your Warhammer dudes, get the painting done, and I'll say, go make something awesome. Go be awesome. You there, go and be awesome. And until then, adios amoebas.